One of the things that's becoming really apparent is just how much the Australian economy is slowing. And today I want to look at the latest jobs figures that have come out, and they show how much damage the RBA has really caused. So the actual employment numbers are really important because for me, they show the direction of the Australian economy outside of resources and outside of the key export drivers that are important in our GDP composition. Domestic demand is very important, and jobs is kind of a live feed into demand, into business sentiment, and into where I think inflation goes and ultimately where interest rates go. And the reason why I've been focusing on jobs over the past few months closer is because that in December, we lost about 50,000 jobs, 60,000 jobs, depending on which number you look at. And the jobs number that came out for January was watched very closely because we needed to see a big recovery, a big offsetting factor to ease fears that the Australian economy is softening significantly. And in these sets of numbers, which I'm sharing with you today, we didn't have that. We had an increase in the unemployment rate to 4.1%. And the unemployment rate now has a 4 in front of it. It's not just 4, it's 4.1. And this is the worst unemployment rate we've had since 2022. Now, sure, it's not a disastrous rate. We're not at 5s or 6s, but for Australia, and given the context of where we have been over the past couple of years, if you were to have woken up a year ago and seen this, you would have seen a number that doesn't look good. And the unemployment rate is going up because we haven't added back jobs that we lost in December. And the amount of jobs that we've actually added in January is very, very soft. And this softness to me is what I think is really important. So if we actually have a look at the January number, we've added 500 odd jobs. Seasonally adjusted is really important. As I've said in my prior videos, the seasonally adjusted number is the number that we watch because they tend to adjust for one-off factors and things that don't necessarily occur. So things that are not reoccurring. And the ABS in their actual statement, so not this release, the actual press release, did make some notes around intentions are there to go back to work and et cetera, et cetera. But to me, I'm not really buying it. I'm seeing this as evidence that despite 640,000 people that have come into the country over the past year, despite all the stimulus that had been put into the market, the economy is finally starting to slow down. And that is purely driven, I believe, by the RBA's actions, particularly in November. These numbers have started to slow markedly since November. And that November interest rate rise is where I continue to focus because I believe that's where the RBA got it wrong. They were looking at their international peers, looking at what's happening in the US, and forming a view that inflation here is going to be like inflation in the US. But what they've missed is perhaps that the Australian consumer is not as strong or not in a similar position to the US consumer. Now, this week, data did come out of the US. It showed that inflation there is still flatlining. It increased a little bit. It's not continuing to decline. And the jobs numbers out of the US were very strong over the past couple of months. So the US economy is in a different position to the Australian economy. And that's where I believe that the RBA has misread things. They in November, they formed a view that they need to kill inflation. In their statement that came out at the beginning of February, they talked about this new word sustainably, and I've actually published a video around it, and you can go and have a look at that. But I think what they're really missing is how different and how much leverage the Australian consumer has to interest rates relative to the rest of the world. And when they came out last month, and in last week's video, I said we will start to see inflation coming down sustainably because the data is going to support it. And today's jobs numbers that have come out do support that. It shows that the unemployment rate is starting to rise. It shows that, obviously this big blip around COVID was a one-off adjustment factor, and we have to look to the trend. And, again, 4.1% is not a disaster, but it is an increase of the 3.6% that we were at. And in a short period of time, the economy is showing that job creation has stalled and is starting to reverse. So if you haven't read this, I'd encourage you to go out and have a look at the composition of this. It shows that we're flatlining. It shows that the jobs that were lost in December, I'll go back to December because December was a very bad number. We lost a lot, and when you lose, you're expected to add them back, and we didn't add them back. And I think all eyes are now on February and March to see if this trend is confirmed. And if it is, and on top of slowing commodity prices and on top of a China that is slowing down, I think the consensus starts to build in April and May that the RBA is going to need to move. There's one more number that I want to show you before we finish this week's analysis. Today's going to be a little bit of a shorter analysis than the past few weeks because we're really hitting the point around jobs. But I just want to show you what's happening in the US and why we can't draw parallels to what's happening there. Let's go and take a look. So here's the data in the US, and what we see is that the US unemployment rate is flat. They've added 350,000 jobs for the prior month. This data came out at the beginning of February. And the point that I want to show here is just how different the US is to Australia at the moment and why the RBA shouldn't be looking at the US. And in fact, the RBA may need to start looking to Asia, and particularly the Chinese economy, where inflation is coming down, where growth has stalled, where things are completely different to the US, as more of a guide than what's happening in the US market. So you can see 350,000 jobs added, the unemployment rate at 3.7%. And if you actually have a look at a lot of the US figures that were coming out this month, jobless claims weren't as high as what they could have been. If you actually have a look this week and have a look at the Purchasing Managers Index, it has bounced, so economic activity is quite strong there. And also the inflation data. The inflation data is very important because that's going to dictate what happens to interest rates. If we have a look at the inflation data that came out in the US, the month-on-month core inflation, 0.4%, expectations were at 0.3%. That is the reason why the US Fed is probably a little bit coy, but that is not what's happening in Australia. What's happening in our own backyard is things are deteriorating faster than expected. We lost a lot of jobs in December. We didn't put them back on in January. Retail sales haven't bounced back. The consumer and their sentiment around the consumer is not strong. And CBA's numbers yesterday showed that the consumer is really suffering, and the consumer continues to pay down debt and is paying the cost of higher interest rates. And those interest rates are really starting to feed in and cripple the Australian consumer. Sure, that's important. That's what the RBA wanted in order to stop inflation from blowing out. And that is not necessarily unplanned. But if they go too far, and if they don't stay on top of it, then this really could unravel for Australia. And that's the big fear. The big fear is that, again, the Reserve Bank is late to the game. They put rates up in November when they didn't need to, and this data shows that. And they're probably going to have to come back to market and cut to unwind some of the damage that they've already done. So that's a quick analysis this week. We've run through the jobs numbers. Unfortunately, it's not good news. I would have preferred to have seen jobs bounce and a more stabling out. But hey, sometimes this happens in markets, and it's important for us to stay ahead of the curve, to look at the data as it comes out and to anticipate what central banks will do. The worst thing that the RBA said in the February statement is that they're willing to put rates up again. There's no way they're going to do that with the jobs numbers tracking where they are, with sentiment where it's at, with the retail where it's at, and with the Chinese economy where it's at. We need to watch that. If you found this useful, make sure you subscribe and share it with somebody that you think can benefit from it. Until then, happy investing until next week.